And I think what people don't know is he really was a dad. So he could be completely hands-on and completely hands-off at the same time.
For decades, the wild friendship and rumored intimacy between Richard Pryor and Marlon Brando was one of Hollywood's most whispered-about secrets. Stories swirled through backlot trailers and late-night interviews, hinting at a connection far deeper, far more complicated, and far more provocative than anyone dared to fully confirm. Now, in a revelation that's sending shockwaves through fans and insiders alike, Richard Pryor's own daughter has come forward with the truth, clearing the air, setting the record straight, and exposing a deeply personal side of her father that most never knew. Richard Pryor, the fearless comedian who shattered taboos with raw honesty and unflinching vulnerability, lived a life filled with contradictions, unfiltered on stage, yet deeply guarded off of it. Marlon Brando, the enigmatic actor known for his intensity and mysterious private life, was equally infamous for defying norms and living without labels. Their connection wasn't just a Hollywood friendship, it was a collision of two tortured geniuses, bonded by trauma, rebellion, and a desire to live freely in a world that punished truth-tellers. But what really happened between them? Were they lovers, as Brando's friend once claimed? Was it just drugs, parties, and artistic chaos, or was there a deeper truth hidden beneath the tabloid noise? Now, for the first time, Pryor's daughter breaks her silence. In a raw, emotional admission, she opens up about what really went on behind closed doors, and what her father privately confessed about Marlon Brando. Her words are heartbreaking, defiant, and utterly unforgettable, because once you hear what she revealed, you'll never see Richard Pryor or Marlon Brando the same way again. The world knew Richard Pryor as the raw, unfiltered genius of comedy, a man who bared his soul on stage, exposing his pain, addiction, trauma, and truth for laughs that often masked deeper wounds. But behind the chaos, the brilliance, and the fame, Richard Pryor lived a life full of secrets, contradictions, and personal demons few could ever truly understand. One of the most persistent and jaw-dropping rumors that followed him, even after his death, was his alleged intimate relationship with Marlon Brando, the iconic actor whose own life was equally tangled in mystery, rebellion, and taboo-breaking behavior. It all resurfaced in 2018 when famed music producer Quincy Jones dropped a bombshell during a now infamous interview, casually claiming that Marlon Brando had affairs with James Baldwin, Marvin Gaye, and yes, Richard Pryor. The world gasped. Was it a joke? Was it real? Most dismissed it as outrageous Hollywood gossip, but the story exploded again when Richard's widow, Jennifer Lee Pryor, confirmed it. Richard would have no shame in telling the truth, she said. He was open about everything in his diaries. The public reaction was swift and divided. Some mocked the claim, others were shocked. But for Richard's daughter, Rain Pryor, the situation was far more personal. This wasn't tabloid fodder to her, this was her father's legacy. And for years she remained silent, letting the noise swell around her. Until recently, when she finally spoke out, not with denial or scandal, but with understanding and a clarity only a daughter could bring. Rain revealed that her father had been incredibly open with her about his past, his bisexuality, his struggles with identity, and his need to express love and desire without boundaries. She didn't confirm every rumor, but what she did say painted a far more honest and heartbreaking portrait of a man who lived boldly, but hurt deeply. According to Rain, Richard never shied away from owning his truth, even when it made others uncomfortable. He lived at the edge of every limit: drugs, fame, sex, pain, and he paid the price for it with his health, his reputation, and his sanity. But more than that, she said her father was never afraid to love, in any form. His connection to Marlon Brando wasn't about scandal. It was about two brilliant, tortured souls finding comfort in each other during Hollywood's most dangerous and judgmental era. In a time when being openly fluid in one's sexuality could destroy a career, Richard Pryor still lived without apology. Rain's revelation wasn't just about her father. It was a commentary on the world that tried to shame him, a society that loved his comedy but never truly wanted to understand his complexity. Her words hit harder than gossip headlines ever could. "My father was human," she said. "He loved who he loved, and I loved him for it." It was a powerful moment of truth, one that peeled back the performance, the myth, and the mania to reveal a man simply trying to be free. And in that honesty, Rain Pryor did something few children of celebrities ever do. She gave us the real man behind the legend. Not just Richard Pryor the comedian, but Richard Pryor the son, the father, the fighter. And maybe, just maybe, the lover of a Hollywood icon named Marlon Brando. To understand the bond between Richard Pryor and Marlon Brando, you have to understand what Hollywood looked like in their era, gold-plated on the surface but dark and chaotic beneath. Pryor and Brando weren't just celebrities. They were rebels. They were men who didn't fit the mold, who spoke truth in an industry addicted to fantasy, and who self-destructed in public while desperately trying to heal in private. They didn't come from the same world, Brando, the brooding heartthrob from Nebraska turned method-acting icon, and Pryor, the boy raised in a brothel in Peoria, Illinois, but they shared something deeper than background. They both lived in emotional extremes. They both challenged what it meant to be masculine, black or white, powerful or vulnerable. And more than anything, they both lived without filters, often to their own undoing. Marlon Brando was notorious for rejecting Hollywood's expectations, refusing to conform to gender norms, and engaging in relationships that blurred lines and labels. Richard Pryor, on the other hand, bled on stage, his comedy laced with brutal honesty about drugs, sex, violence, and his lifelong battle with self-worth. Their friendship, or as some now believe their romantic involvement, wasn't about spectacle. It was about two men who recognized pain in each other. According to Rain Pryor, her father never spoke with shame about his experiences. He may have struggled with demons, crack addiction, failed marriages, depression, but he had clarity about his past, and when he talked about love, it didn't come with boundaries. What's chilling is how much of Pryor's private anguish was already hiding in plain sight. His routines, though comedic, often carried a quiet scream. He'd joke about setting himself on fire while freebasing cocaine, but behind that punchline was a suicide attempt. He'd laugh about his broken relationships, but behind the grin was a man haunted by the abuse he endured as a child. When Marlon Brando came into his orbit, it wasn't a typical celebrity friendship. It was raw, it was risky, and it was rooted in their shared experience of navigating fame as fractured souls. Brando, too, had lost himself to addiction, to grief, to the unbearable expectations of being a symbol. In the shadows of late-night parties, whispered conversations, and drug-fueled Hollywood gatherings, they found something unspoken. Whether it was romantic, sexual, or simply a profound emotional intimacy, Rain Pryor's words suggest that the relationship was real and deeply human. What makes it even more tragic is how both men ultimately succumbed to the weight of their inner torment. Brando withdrew from the spotlight, his body and spirit eroding long before his death in 2004. Pryor, ravaged by multiple sclerosis and decades of physical and emotional self-harm, died in 2005, his body broken but his voice still echoing through generations. And now, Rain's revelation brings that history back into the light, not for scandal, but for honesty. She didn't speak to shock anyone. She spoke because truth matters. And in speaking that truth, she reminded the world that Pryor and Brando weren't just tabloid stories. They were men who lived hard, felt deeply, and connected in a way that defied the constraints of their time. And maybe, in each other, they found the one thing they were both searching for in a city built on illusion, a brief moment of realness. When Rain Pryor finally decided to speak, it wasn't for attention. It wasn't to confirm salacious rumors or feed the gossip machine that has long feasted on the legacies of Hollywood's most complex figures. It was to reclaim her father's humanity, something that has often been lost in the myth-making surrounding Richard Pryor's life. To Rain, her father was more than just the groundbreaking comedian, more than the controversial actor, more than the punchline to stories about wild nights and raw performances. He was the man who read her poetry, who cried in her arms, who taught her to question everything, including society's rigid rules about identity, love, and masculinity. Her defense of him wasn't about denial, it was about context. She didn't flinch when asked about the Brando rumors. She didn't call them lies. Instead, she offered something far more radical, understanding. She reminded the world that Richard Pryor was a man of immense trauma, Abused as a child, neglected, thrown into adult situations before he even knew what it meant to be a child. He lived in a brothel, raised by his grandmother while his mother disappeared and his father drank himself into rage. The man we saw on stage was born from pain, and that pain shaped how he loved, who he trusted, and why he often blurred the lines between passion and destruction. Rain revealed that Pryor was not ashamed of his sexuality, but he also didn't feel the need to explain it. He didn't owe anyone labels. What mattered to him was honesty, and he'd lived his truth in ways that most men still don't dare to today. And what made Rain's words even more profound was her refusal to let the public reduce him to just one story. Yes, he may have loved Marlon Brando, in whatever form that love took. But he also loved his children. He loved his art. He loved fiercely and imperfectly, because that's the only way he knew how to survive. Rain's perspective added a rare intimacy to a man often viewed as a legend rather than a person. She spoke of late-night talks, of watching her father's body deteriorate as MS stole his mobility, of sitting beside him as he fought through pain just to smile. She didn't pretend he was flawless. He wasn't. He hurt people. He made mistakes. He relapsed. He failed. But in telling her truth, Rain didn't protect his legacy by burying the past. She protected it by telling the whole story. And in doing so, she dismantled decades of toxic silence surrounding sexuality in black communities and the entertainment industry at large. She reminded the world that pain doesn't define a person. What they do with it does. Richard Pryor used his pain to build a voice that changed the face of comedy forever. And even if he shared love or intimacy with Marlon Brando, it wasn't the scandal that mattered. It was the fact that, in a world that punished authenticity, Richard lived more freely than most ever will. Rain's words didn't rewrite history. They made it whole. And in that brave act of truth-telling, she gave her father something he rarely received in his lifetime: unconditional acceptance. Richard Pryor's life was a symphony of contradictions, hilarious and harrowing, brilliant and broken, public and painfully private. By the time the final years of his life arrived, he was no longer the electric force on stage, pacing with a cigarette in hand, slicing through taboo with a joke that made you laugh and wince at the same time. Multiple sclerosis had taken over his body, slowly and cruelly, robbing him of movement, strength, and eventually, even his voice. But what it never stole was his soul, and in those quiet final days, it was his daughter Rain who sat beside him, not as a fan, not as an audience, but as a witness to the man beneath the myth. She saw his pain, yes, but she also saw his peace. In one of her most revealing interviews, Rain recalled moments when her father would gaze out the window in silence, lost in thought, maybe remembering the heights he once soared or the people he once loved, including perhaps Marlon Brando. But in those moments there was no shame, no regret, just the stillness of a man who had lived without censorship, who had been loved and had dared to love in a world that demanded he hide. The story of Richard and Marlon isn't about sex or scandal. It's about two icons who found something human in each other amidst the machinery of fame and addiction. And while the headlines clung to the salacious soundbites, Rain's voice cut through with something far more powerful: truth, love, and context. She reminded the world that her father wasn't a caricature or a rumor. He was a man who hurt deeply and loved just as hard. She reminded us that what matters most is not who he was rumored to sleep with, but what he stood for. He stood for honesty, for speaking the unspeakable, for telling the jokes no one else had the courage to tell. And in doing so, he became more than just a comedian. He became a symbol of liberation, of truth-telling, and of defiance in the face of shame. Today, Richard Pryor's name still evokes laughter, but thanks to Rain, it now also invites reflection. She has given us a fuller picture, one that includes both fire and fragility, chaos and clarity, darkness and dignity. And in her brave act of exposure, not of scandal but of soul, she gave her father something Hollywood never quite did while he was alive: grace. As the final curtain falls on this chapter of Richard Pryor's life, what lingers is not the controversy, but the courage. Not the gossip, but the love. And not the pain, but the purpose. Because in the end, Richard Pryor wasn't just the man who made us laugh through our tears. He was the man who dared to cry in front of us first, and through his daughter's voice, he's still telling the truth. Even now,